Okay, so this is likely the video that's going to be completely praised or completely chastised, and I guess time will tell on that front. But I've decided to take it upon myself and rank the BT Bam albums from worst to best. Their entire main discography, so from their self-title up into Automata 2, obviously not including Colors 2 yet because it's not out. However, the singles are showing it to be quite promising. Given how long I've been listening to this band and how much I praise this band generally, I found that I was in somewhat of a position to be able to talk on this with a bit of knowledge. Not that it needs to even be stated, as this is kind of a given, but this is my opinion and I'd love to hear yours. I like all of BT Bam's music, from what I would consider their worst album to what I definitely consider their best, so in no way am I discrediting any of these albums fully. That being said, let's get right into this list and start with what I consider to be BT Bam's worst album. BT Bam's BT Bam, their thrashy, hardcore, punky style runs very true on this record, but that's not just taking the place of their prog influences that would show up a lot more later. This album still dabbles in weird rhythms, weird time signatures, musical change-ups, a lot of things that weren't the contemporary at the time. BT Bam are doing something new here that wasn't very often seen, especially in the scene that they were in. There are standout moments on this album, like the clean, almost metalcore soft vocals on More Myself to Kill, and the weird bar scene in Chevin I'll Cut a Flip. It was moments like these and many others on the album that showed that BT Bam were coming in already a cut above the rest, but still embracing the scene they were in. However, I'd say it's their downfall that they don't embrace their uniqueness enough. A lot of these songs do blend together, and whilst a lot of them have their moments, it can be hard to pick one from the next if you're listening to this album fully. It's hard to even say they'd found their sound, and I guess that's to be understood, it's their first album. Yet it's still worth noting that this was an admirable attempt towards what they would later develop. Still, the hard, punky, fast nature of it makes for a fun listen, and that's worth something. This takes us to... This is BT Bam's second record, and there for sure is a musical shift. You can feel the focus on structure here while still maintaining the manic energy that BT Bam had already shown. And I'd say that manic energy is pushed to a new level here with some of the most distorted, scratching, bleeding, ear-piercing production that they've done. I'd say the notable songs on this record, like Mordecai, show that they're going in a new direction and can do more than they had been doing. It's an undertaking in itself, that song, the ability to blend such harshness with such beauty towards the end of the song, and just a build-up into those leads which Paul would be more and more known for, which follows right into a track basically no one talks about, Reaction. This essentially ambient track with just some weeping vocals from Tommy over it, and you can tell he's really coming into his own here. It's Radiohead-esque in the way it's so haunting and so ambient, but still so very much Tommy and BT Bam. Tommy is taking form here, and yeah, there is an amateur quality to his vocals still, as there definitely was on the first record, but his melodic lines, his phrasing, his harmonies, everything is taking more form and in a much better way than it was previously. Riff development compared to the last album is unbelievable. Paul and Nick are very much taking strides in the right direction here, with far more unique and complex choices in the writing, like in aesthetic, the need for repetition, and just the pummeling Ada Dugligma. This album's best feature is almost why it's one of its worst features. The aggression here is palpable for sure, but it can almost become grating, and it's as if they haven't mastered, understandably, the balance between destruction and easing it back somewhat, because that amount of aggression can become quite numbing, and the lack of diversity there makes it so the more aggressive moments don't stand out anymore, to where a kind of bland palette is developed. BT Bam were obviously finding their own still. This isn't the BT Bam that is around today. And to be fair, I don't think any BT Bam album to the next is the same in any way. But they were becoming fleshed out, just not quite fully yet. I still love this album, and Mordecai is one of the first songs that got me into BT Bam years ago, as it did many others. I think it's worth a listen, but it still has to be placed this low. And that takes us to our next one. Probably going to be a controversial take, but here we are, which is probably going to be the first pick which is going to get a lot of upset, angry reactions, and that's fine. But it's a pick I'm going to have to make, and that's for a few reasons. Do I think Coma is a good record? Of course. Do I think it's the worst of BT Bam's new era? Definitely. This album has its moments. It's focused, to the point, it's proggy, it's beautiful, it's daunting, it's big. But these are things which only occur periodically. There is great writing on this album. In fact, there's a song on here which I think is easily one of BT Bam's best ever, and that's Famine Wolf. From the opening riff to the triplets that come along later over Tommy's creepy talking. It's just there's so much to be admired about this song that I wish was more so on the record as a whole. And one of the singles for this album, Coma Machine, it's a genuinely great single. I think, yeah, it's very simple in many ways and quite complex in others, and I think that works towards BT Bam's strengths. It's anthemic, it's gorgeous, it's big, and it's epic, and it's a good song. However, it's in the literal philosophy of this record as to where it falls flat for me. The band themselves have stated that they were aiming for a rock opera kind of vibe, and I'd say they definitely achieved it, which is good. Sadly, for me personally, that is not a sound I enjoy. For me personally, this wasn't done well. There's a lot of flaccid presentation of moments that could have been grand. Even the closer, which I think the actual end of the closer is quite great. It's huge, it's massive, but the very sparse, thin pianos and Tommy's voice at the start just don't scream closer to me. I like it more now than I used to, and I'm not going to deny that maybe one day it could grow on me more, because it has its moments. But there's just too much about this record that I find underwhelming, and almost as if they've missed the mark on what they could have done, to where I can't rank it any higher than I have done. Change is good, and BT Bam is typically fantastic at change. Compare Alaska to Parallax 2 to Automata, and they are massively different albums, and all of them are great, but it feels like the change here just wasn't done well. Songs like the Ectopic Stroll are fun, but it's almost as if they push the goofiness too far, whereas they've perfected goofiness in other areas, like Bloom. That being said, let's move to number 6, which is... Holy Jesus, this album is manic, and it's amazing. It's what to me is the best BT Bam album before the great colours shift, as you could call it. This album is punchy, aggressive, fast, and straight up violent at times. BT Bam's structure was coming in more and more here, but it was being mixed now with their better writing and their aptitude for writing heavy riffs that are memorable and not too cookie cutter. BT Bam were making the effort to prove themselves here, and you could feel they were getting close to doing it. They already had a cult admiration, but they were stepping into their own here, and it was becoming clear that a climax was coming soon. There are songs on here like Cell Keys, which are actual cornerstones of the genre, with Paul's solo being beloved among many people outside of BT Bam fans alone. And what I find most admirable about this album is that BT Bam were being unapologetically them. There was pure aggression on Crow Keys and Boat Shoes and Autodidact, beauty on Cell Keys and Medicine Wheel, and just an unhinged mental state on Laser Speed. It was this diversity that BT Bam needed to propel themselves that they had been missing previously. There was an air of cohesion here, which I think is probably due to the lineup change. And while there are points to this album that I think go almost over the top in a bad way, like 343 and Autodidact, this album is genuinely so fun that it's almost easy to look past those faults. I know this sounds like a very positive breakdown of this album for 6th place, but that's kind of what BT Bam's like. Next up is the first of the Parallaxes, and an EP no less. However, I'm including this here as it's essentially vital to their discography, and it essentially works as its own entity, whereas Automata 1 and 2 might as well be their own one thing. It feeds also into the Parallax story in just a 30-minute 3-song development, and it is unbelievable from start to end. This album spans the technical death metal that BT Bam were known for, but also their progressive side was coming out a lot more. The band sounds unbelievable here. Tommy is at his best in both his screams and cleans. Paul and Dusty's writing had reached such a pinnacle of perfected complexity, and it needs to be said, but BT Bam's production has never been better than on this and Parallax 2. Drums are thick and punchy, the guitars are sharp and heavy and wide, the bass is thick and smooth and just caresses itself through the mix. And there are moments like the opening of Lunar Wilderness that are unrivaled by a lot of what BT Bam had done before and since. BT Bam's cohesion as members and a collective sound was a growing monster, and while I don't think it diminished after this, I think it reached this huge, all-encompassing sound right here. This album is perfect or near perfect in a lot of ways. It sets up perfectly for Parallax 2. It's heavy, it's beautiful, it's catchy, it's fast, it's aggressive, it's slow when it needs to be. It's unique and it's prog to the max, but BT Bam to the max. While I can't say much bad about this album at all, I will say that its length is a detractor, but that's just to be expected. On to 4. It might come as a surprise to many that I've put Colours this low, because it is to many BT Bam's best record to date, a quintessential album for the genre, and what is essentially a classic now of prog metal. BT Bam found their sound here, they hit their stride, and they were really at a point that they had never been. That's shown both in the writing and the success of this album. This album was important to the scene, and it also showed what the genre could be at the time. While you'd have bands come later down the line that were doing things like this or pushing the envelope, the genre wasn't being revitalized like it was right here on this album by BT Bam. And people could almost see it coming, but maybe not to this extent. BT Bam were now metal royalty, in a sense. They were associated with perfection and some of the best writing, some of the best ideas, being the most unique band, and having members that were some of the best in the scene individually. Song lengths were fleshed out, they were spanning musically many different genres inside of one song. Speaking of that, Colours might as well be one song, because this is where they embraced flowing the album as one listen, which is really what it should be. Colours is aggressive and heavy, yes, but equal parts gorgeous and well composed. The riffs are sticky, mental, cerebral, but so well thought out at the same time. And in the clean sections, being spacey and moving, and just at a level which the band hadn't touched yet. They were doing stuff which might not even have felt acceptable here, being unique, envelope pushing. There's a fucking hoedown section in Ants of the Sky. There is essentially nothing negative I can say about this album, and that's going to be the case for a lot of what is further down this list. It's just that BT Bam perfected their perfection. This album gets extra props from me for being so ahead of the curve and so important. And yeah, it's abrasive, but it's always thought out. It's always meant to be abrasive, and it's never over the top. If you haven't listened to Colours yet, you're missing out on what is maybe one of the most important metal albums ever. Now, into our top three. I can feel the agitation of people knowing I put Automata over Colours, but I have my reasons for that. Automata is currently BT Bam's latest album, and I think it's elevated a lot of what I like about BT Bam. To me, this album feels different to Coma, but also Coma perfected. This is arguably another lighter BT Bam release where the focus is on prog rather than death metal. However, no aggression is detracted from here. The uniqueness and sprawling and heaviness is still here. This album doesn't have constant lulling moments like Coma did, and is actually mostly pretty explosive at times. From the whacked out passages on Yellow Eyes, the soaring qualities of Millions, and the heaviness of Condemned to the Gallows, this album was setting itself up for greatness. But then they push even further with the heightened, unbelievable levels of Blot, which is easily one of BT Bam's best songs ever. And this is only on the first half. We move into part two, which has the proverbial bellow, which is just a sprawling epic. It spans multiple genres, multiple decades, multiple emotions, multiple everything, because that's what this album was. And it's great because they perfected the ending. What Coma failed to do was have an emotional ending. But the grid, Jesus Christ, you really feel the story coming to a close with the lines, "We are in this together." There's such a feeling of unity and power and palpable emotion behind this moment. This album I've seen catch a lot of flack online as being a downer in their discography, and I really don't understand that. My only gripe is that there's literally no reason for it to be two albums, but that doesn't detract in any way from the music. This album is exciting, it's fun, it pushed the envelope again, it is so emotional, and it deserves this spot in my opinion. Moving on to number two. So, The Great Misdirect at number two is also maybe a strange choice. It is low in song count, but decent in length, and the title is very descriptive to what the album feels like. Coming off of Colours 2 years prior, it was strange to see where BT Bam could go. If they could nail that perfection again, if they could be more envelope pushing, and really what they'd do. And I'd argue, whilst this album didn't make as big a splash as Colours, it is the more unique, superior, more explosive, more raw, more complex album. With only 6 songs, they created such a unique palette of aggression, beauty, and all the things you'd really now expect from BT Bam, as I've stated 100 times over, but in a way that was better than they'd done it before. You have drifting beauty in mirrors, these weird spacey sections in obfuscation, the carnival-inspired fossil genera, and the just epic Swim to the Moon. And this album is really heavy. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but this is definitely one of BT Bam's heavier releases, despite it being quite long after their roots. It was like, at this point, the band had found an even more perfect chemistry together. I'd say this album actually does lack in some softer moments. There are some, but it's very sparse, and they're not very often. It's made up for by the way the heavy moments move, how creative they are, how non-stop they are, how unique they are. And the goofy nature of BT Bam was coming in here, but in a more crafted way. And maybe that's what sells this album most for me over Colours, is that it is fun. This album isn't even particularly happy, but it's energetic and it's fun. It's a thrill ride with excellent writing, excellent production, no boundaries, and perfect pacing. For me, this feels like the inverse of Colours in some ways. You have the darkness of Colours versus the very bright, open explosiveness of the Great Misdirect, and of course they both have their place, but I feel like this works better and is a more enjoyable listen. Once again, there's nothing I can say wrong about this album. This is BT Bam's heaviness perfected in a lot of ways, but maybe that's even more testament to what is my number one spot, which is... Maybe you saw this coming, maybe you didn't. I know a lot of people love this album as much as I do, and that's for good reason, because Parallax 2 is, in my genuine opinion, the best piece of music ever made. And I know that's a bold statement to make, but I have a lot of reasons for why I feel that way. It almost feels like I have so much good to say that I have nothing to say because it's all going to be praise, and you've heard it before on the albums prior, but it's even more here, and it's not like it's even close. Parallax 2 is so far above the Great Misdirect, it makes me feel bad for even saying that. I of course see zero flaws in this album, and if before I've been saying zero flaws, I typically mean it, but of course there's going to be moments where you're like, oh, you know, that could have been different, maybe that didn't need to be there. But there are zero flaws in this album. Firstly, the writing. BT Bam here are at their most experimental, their most progressive, their most interesting, and that's from the heavy riffs, the fast riffs, the slow riffs, the clean riffs, the sad riffs, the happy riffs, the goofy riffs. Everything here it's at its best. The slow riffs, they're never boring. They might be lulling, but they're never boring. They're entrancing and enjoyable, whereas the heavy moments are brutal and never messy, but completely considered and thought about. This album brings some of BT Bam's heaviest and most aggressive with Telos, but also fun. Not silly, but fun with Bloom. They are experimental and great from one song to the next, and it never falters, creating a sonic experience which never stops, but is never bland. You are constantly poured into this album, and it begs for your attention, and all you can do is give it to it. Even in tracks like Autumn, where it's purely ambient, purely noise, purely a soundscape, there is a reason and a purpose, and especially since it fits into the story of the album. There are these moments of pure grandness and explosion, like the end of Astral Body, and especially the end of Silent Flight Parliament, which is one of BT Bam's best songs and definitely their best closer. The bringing in of the riff from the start of that album, but with strings and screams and everything coming together. Jet propulsion, disengage, goodbye to everything. It all just culminates into this moment that is almost indescribable. Then you have these moments like the orchestral break in Extremophile Elite, which is then mirrored by the band members, and it takes what was a great moment into an elevated moment, and that is the theme of this album. It's elevation to the next level, to the next level, to the next level, and they do that so well. But then there's these soul-destroying emotional passages, like on Layer Goes to Rest, which in itself is a fast, heavy song, yet manages to have these moments of pure reflection. It feels like more than ever, BT Bam were at free reign to do whatever they wanted, and they really took that opportunity and went with it. The band is at their best here, and they know it. You can feel it. It's so BT Bam, yet so unique, and all the members are at a level which they hadn't been at yet. There is a cohesion here. Tommy, as with Parallax 1, sounds better than ever in both his screams and cleans. The production sounds better than ever, being huge and impactful. And then to top off this incredible album, the story of Parallax starts to wrap up and develop mostly here. The way the musical themes and lyrics and sound palette feeds directly into the story is so tight-knit perfect that it feels a shame to listen to the album without reading the lyrics. The Black Mask, the Prospect, the Night Owls, they are all developed here along with the music. And it is genuinely upsetting and moving and emotional and powerful, and with every word that's sung, you can link that with a word of the story, and every lyric is a moment in its own right. I really don't know what else to say about this album. I don't know if BT Bam can best this. They've yet to do it, but no one else has either, because this album, to me, in a few words, is hard to believe. Thank you for listening to my list. I had quite a lot of fun doing it and writing the script, and I'd love to hear your views, as well as what you thought of mine, which I'm sure is going to be a broad spectrum. Thank you for watching. I don't typically make content like this, but I've always wanted to, so if you like this, as well as if you look at my other stuff, then subscribe and do all that jazz. Thank you.